Next thing on the docket, N-word discussion.
Okay.
This is a good one too.
I don't think it's necessarily horrible to be disrespectful. We got really heated in an N-word discussion. I didn't like bully the. I didn't.
No.
Just
Okay.
making sure for random people because it
Yo,
can sound like that. Okay?
You're
But
very
anyway,
conscious
go
of
ahead.
optics, and that's
Okay.
a good thing, in a good way. And I'm not meaning that as a dig at all. I
Okay,
totally
no, go
get
for
it.
it.
You've been on the internet for longer, at least in this space. For longer. We were having a discussion just about N-word usage,
Yeah.
and it was a panel. And on panels, I'm just gonna be heated because,
Yeah, of course.
like, they're
How we
stupid.
go.
Yeah, that's it. They're entertainment. Which it's kind of my meme. That's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But it sucks because it's a panel, and we don't really get a really solid back and forth. So, I think it started out. We were talking about you had the opinion basically that pretty much no one should be able to use it, right?
Either nobody or everybody. Yeah,
Nobody or
at this
everybody.
point, yeah.
Okay, and I came up with an analogy, and the analogy was that people within an in group can obviously use a word, or can say something that's offensive to that in group, but stepping outside of that group, it's probably going to be viewed as offensive. You don't automatically have this presumption that this person is meaning it with no intention to harm or whatever, right? So, and I came up with the analogy. I was saying basically like someone within a family, right? The identified in group in this situation is a family. So then someone from that family can make jokes about any person in that family, and there's this automatic presumption that this is not meant to be harmful, and so on and so forth. But if someone outside of that family was to make that joke, or whatever, it becomes like harmful. And so, for example, your mama, and that kind of, if I make a your mama joke, the your in that situation means that we're referring to the mom that belongs to that person. And if we're part of the same in group, we have the same mother, then it's also mine, right? So then we're an in group.
Okay, that's an interesting example. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So then someone else can also say your mama jokes because the your mama in that situation is a reference to their mom, right? So they can do that. They can't make a joke about my mom. I can't make a joke about their mom because I'm not part of that in group.
I understand this explanation. I just don't think it applies to the N-word because I don't think that the N-word is ever used as an insult. It's just like a hey, what's up?
Sure, we do all the time.
No. Well, it can be, but that's not the most common usage of it.
I think it's used. It's used pretty commonly both ways. Like if I say I hate this stupid nigga, nigga is not meant to be a term of endearment in that situation.
No, but I don't think it's meant to be like he's an N-word. I think
Sure.
it's meant to be like I hate this guy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But so I guess the point being, it's not always meant to be something uplifting. But regardless, when it's being used, it's being used.
So this would be like how I would disagree with this. I think that if you were outside, hanging around on a street corner, and a black guy walked up to you, and he's like, "What the fuck are you loitering at here, you stupid N-word?" And he hard-R'd you, I think you'd be like, "What the fuck?" I think you'd look and you'd be like, "That's kind of fucked up."
Sure.
I don't think you'd be chill with that. Now, maybe it wouldn't be quite the same reaction as like a white person saying it, but I think if a black person hard-R'd you, it would ding a little bit.
I think so. The thing is, what's crazy is in that situation, if a black person said that, it would be all of the things leading up to that. Like, what the F are you doing here? Like, that part automatically would be alarming.
Yeah, and I
then
agree.
You stupid.
I
N-word.
agree with
The
that,
stupid part-
100%.
But the
But this is
N-word
why.
itself
But this is
wouldn't carry a lot of weight.
yeah.
with
But
it.
like, so this is like where I comment this with like all the context shit. Like, if two white people are like rapping onto a song, or if they see each other, it's like, "Yo, what's up, my brother, ninja, or whatever." Like, who the fuck cares? Like, why? Why does it matter? It just seems like such a dumb thing to even think about.
Okay, so just to make sure, regarding that first point, clearly it wouldn't be the N-word that would be the thing that would be alarming you in that first example. It would be all of the surrounding things and all the things that preceded it. Whereas, and the reaction, while it would probably be adverse again to all those other things. But let's take all that context out. Black person walks by another black person and says the N-word, hard R, right? More often than not, you're going to get a look of surprise, a look of shock, like, what the freak, where'd that come from? And probably an ignoring of it. Whereas if a white person does it, there's going to be an entirely different reaction.
Yeah, there'll be a little bit of a culture thing, but
So
it's not going to be accepted
even
from the
if they
black
didn't
person.
say anything else. If the only thing they said was the N-word, more likely than not, you're going to
Sure.
get violence with the white person.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. So then I think what that establishes that regardless Like even when it comes to the hard R, when a black person says it versus a white person saying it, there's going to be all sorts of context and assumptions and presumptions that go into that usage just because of the person, because of the race of the individual using it.
Potentially, because there's like a cultural expectation, and somebody that's willing to defy cultural expectation, even if the expectation is dumb,
Yeah.
it's going to make people think like, wait, what's going on? Because
Right.
you're willing to defy
Right.
like an expectation. Yeah, of course.
So with that analogy, with that presumption that automatically happens, like with the Yamama thing, we making that analogy similar to the N word, where it's like there is a presumption by the person using the word that there isn't this contextual hating or dehumanizing of the person, because to do that would be to dehumanize yourself.
Yeah.
So there is that realistic presumption, and we do this all the time. Like you gave an example. You mentioned, you said if you and your fiance, if you were making misogynist jokes or whatever,
she knows I don't mean it because we've got a history, and she knows. Yeah.
Yeah, but then you said if someone else was to do that, there wouldn't be that presumption to be like,
Exactly.
oh, what are you doing? In the same way, the N word. If I'm saying something to another black person or just to anyone with the N word in it, there is not this presumption of disdain, presumption of dehumanizing, and all these other things.
Yeah, with no history, I would probably generally default to assuming that. Yeah.
Sure,
But I think
then
like if
we
you have
can
more
never
context in a
afford that.
situation, that's kind of what I feel like changes things.
Well, okay, which context would be added that would like undermine or kind of
Like I think if you've got like a group of black guys and a white friend, and they all like grown up together, they live in the same block or whatever, and you know the white guy also said it along with the black guys. I don't think that for somebody external to that to look at that and be like, oh my god, this is so horrible. It just seems like, well, I don't know, is it? No one here seems to care.
Well, I think it depends, because I think for some people, like if you're going to do something within that in group, then it's probably best to keep it confined to that in group. And if someone else within the in group has an offense to something, then you don't do it. For example, my father hates the N word, hates it. That's not something I say to him. I spam it all day, right? But I don't say it in front of my dad. So we have the understanding that when my dad's around, we as a group don't say that, because even though it's something that we have this shared oppression about, or this presumption of whatever, like we know that it's offensive to him, and since it's offensive to him, then it's something that we avoid with
And
him.
I think that's totally fair when you're around your father. And I think that's respect that you afford him, because that's somebody that you would make accommodations for, because
Sure.
you love your dad, I'm assuming.
Of course.
Would it be fair for your dad to go to other areas and try to tell other people what they can or cannot say based on what he finds offensive? And are those other people obligated to respect his proclivities there?
So I think if my dad's in another location and somebody says something, then my dad can obviously voice to them, "Hey, I'm not a big fan of this
Let's say,
word, I
like,
don't do that."
hypothetically, let's say that you go to, like...
Well,
I'm
hold
gonna
on,
be a
let me finish it
stereotype-
really quick.
Oh,
Let me
yeah,
finish it.
okay. Well, let's get an actual scenario, and then you can tell me.
Sure. All right,
Let's say
my-
you go to, like, a basketball court, okay?
Okay.
And there's, like, a bunch of black guys just playing ball or whatever, and you go to play. And then your dad overhears a conversation, like, on the other half of the court, and they're just calling each other, like, yo, good shot, ninja, okay? And then your dad is like, hey, does he have a right to be like, hey, you guys need to not say that word while I'm here and I can hear it? Do you think he would do that? And then do you think he has a right to do that? And should they listen?
He'd probably be a lot more respectful in his delivery, because you can't control other adults. So you
Sure.
probably ask more of an entreating thing, like an appeal to decency. Hey, could you guys not say that word around me? This is what happens all the time.
Okay.
And so then those people, they have a right to go ahead and say, well, I have freedom of speech, right? I can do whatever I want to do. Or they can sit there and say, maybe it makes a little bit more sense for me to go ahead and respect what he's saying here. And they have a right. It's not a matter of right, it's a matter of decency, right? Because they can respect what my dad's request is, or they can just choose to say, I don't care about how you feel about it, which is inherently disrespectful.
Sure. But I don't think it's necessarily horrible to be disrespectful. I think that depending on, like, the context in the area, I think it's fair to speak how you want. So, like, if I was playing basketball, which I would never do because I'm fucking horrible at basketball.
Sure.
But if I was playing basketball, like, with my son at, like, the park, and there were other kids or families there, I would probably moderate my language quite a bit, because, like, there are kids, there's an expectation here, right? But if we were going to, like the gym or something, or maybe to another area where it's more like adult focused or whatever, and I'm like, I'm swearing or something, like, if somebody comes out and like, hey, can you not swear here? I probably would because I'm a respectful person in real life. But like also, I could understand being like, no, you know what? Like if you don't like this, like go somewhere else. Like I can talk with the way that I want with my kid or any friends here. Like if you're so upset by this, like go somewhere else. Like you don't have a
Sure.
right to police me here.
So yeah, so it really does boil down to, I guess, a matter of decency. Because in the same sense, a person could be like doing some PDA. It doesn't have to be particularly ridiculous, but just someone displaying PDA. Someone has a kid there. You can be mindful, and right, and it's a respectful, decent thing to do. To say, I'll probably like hold some of this back, pull back on some of this in front of these children. Same with language. I can choose to do that. But regardless, you have a right to do PDA in front of other people. But again, it's about decency and order and respect. So in the same sense, no one can ever tell that white person in that group with those other black people that he doesn't have the right to say the word because it's free. It's freedom of speech. But it is indecent. It is disrespectful. And I don't think it's an unfounded disrespect. I do think there might be certain situations where it's like, hey, like you can go into someone else's space, like in someone else's home, and then like trying to tell them or control what they're doing, it becomes a little bit more ridiculous. Although even still you can make appeals there. For example, if I'm going to someone else's house and they're like about to light up a blunt in front of me, I can ask them, hey, could you not smoke that while I'm here, right? And they can choose to say, sure, I'll respect that. Or they can choose to say, I don't respect that because this is my house and I have a right.
And I think that's fair. And I think we can get into the weeds on like what's a respectful request versus like what's a disrespectful request. If I'm at a park with my kid, I can probably ask somebody, could you not swear? If I'm at like a baseball game, I probably can be like, hey, can you guys stop swearing up there? Because it's like, well, what is the expectation? And we would probably mostly agree on that. I think the part that we get into like more of a disagreement on is like, well, what are the ramifications of if you decide to ignore somebody's request? Because if you're going to say like, well, that makes you like a little bit rude, I can buy that. But that's not the problem when we talk about certain words, is that it makes you like racist or horrible. And I will say, like, as somebody that grew up, and this is kind of the frustration for talking about this this word so much, is the frustration growing up is there was one word that I heard growing up that actually made me so uncomfortable. And it's more uncomfortable than when I hear people say the N-word. And maybe this was just in a conservative household. But listening to a lot of Fox News and a lot of conservative talk show hosts, the word that I heard that made me really uncomfortable was thug. Because when somebody said thug, they meant black person every time. And they meant it like the worst way possible. And that was always like, but I don't think you would ever get in trouble. People would be like, oh, that's a little bit.
You thought that was worse than the N-word?
Well, yeah, because like, well, in terms of like hearing like two white guys call each other the N-word or somebody like rapping to a song, like thug was basically like the white version of the N-word for at least like the 90s and early 2000s.
Sure.
That's what you always said, thug or gangster or hoodlum, like things that you would say to talk about black people without saying the N-word or black people.
Sure. And I think this is a perfect example of why these two words are so incredibly different. And I think this also contributes to why there's such gatekeeping, right? Because when you can look at something from your perspective, having watched these shows and hearing someone say thug and almost equating that with the N-word, whereas black people would never even come close to that. I can't think of a black person on the planet that would say that it's equivalent. Now,
Not equivalent, but I bet if they heard a white person say something like that, they'd know what they were talking about.
Well, sure, but if we're not going to like live in some like binary world in which like it's just bad or good, then we're going to have to recognize that there's degrees to these things, and the N-word is probably 3 times as potent as the word thug, even from the worst intending individuals. And it could be offensive, it could be problematic, but there's so much more contextualization that goes behind the word, the N-word, that would probably resonate significantly stronger with black people. And I think there is always this attempt, like, or not always, I'll just say this. It seems like very often when you start getting into the weeds of the conversation surrounding this word, that you'll find through like that plenty of people start having these things where it demonstrates that they don't fully understand the word. For example, when someone starts saying, oh, the N-word is similar to cracker, and it's like, clearly these two words are not the same. Or you had people saying things like Karen is equivalent to the N-word. Clearly these things aren't the same.
Equivalent, no, but similar in usage sometimes, I think so.
Well, I mean, again, it's incredibly reductive. I mean, but similar in usage that it's just derogatory.
No, similar in usage in that we're trying to find some characteristic that in and of itself shouldn't be bad, but we're going to make you feel bad for it, and the insult's going to revolve around it.
Okay, there's that, and that is not at all what the N word is, because the N word wasn't focused on a characteristic necessarily. The N word was something that was, again, like just completely dehumanizing of the individuals, whereas Karen was something that was a reaction to.
Well, let's
it was
to be
focused
clear.
on the
Well,
action.
the N word wasn't about individuals. It was.
I'm
a
sorry. It was, yeah, it's
characteristic.
about the entire group.
Yeah,
right.
of black people. That
right.
was the
Whereas
characteristic.
Karen, while it was predominantly used against white people, we see people using Karen against black people. We see people using it against Hispanic people. We also see.
Oh, I don't think Karen is as much like a racial insult. I think that sometimes it gets a little sexist. Where anytime a woman complains about anything, people start to call her Karen immediately, and it's like, well, hold on, wait, doesn't she have like legitimate complaint?
But I think the very big difference between Karen and the N word is that for no matter what, we didn't automatically assume that all white people or all women were Karens. It was only specific women that had specific actions and specific traits. Whereas N word was something that was universally applied just to black people for them being black. And so I think those two things are different. You can be a woman and not be a Karen. During certain times in history, no matter who you were, if you were a black person, you were the N word.
Sure, historically speaking,
Extremely different.
I understand that we can get like ultra academic in terms of like historically, like how are these words?
That's not academic.
But in terms, well, so like here's like the issue. Okay, at the end of the day, I was working at my apartment gym like 3 weeks ago. Okay, and like two white guys came in, and very clearly they wanted to be gangsters. Okay, they had like the droopy pants that you drew or whatever. One guy was like working out. He has his phone blaring, some dumb shit or whatever. And another guy comes in and he sees him. He's like, "What's up, ninja?" And they're both very fucking white. Okay, we're just like, who the fuck cares? Who cares?
Black people care.
Why?
That's who. I think because, again, I think for black people to have experienced something and have done something, it's not very common to like reclaim a word and use it in a positive way for themselves to make sure that, like, I guess to kind of disempower the word to some degree.
Which it has been.
Yeah, for sure, dramatically.
But if it's been defanged, then who cares if people use it?
It's only partially defanged. It's not fully there. And I think it's defanged and I'm sorry, it's partially defanged, right? So when you experience it, like I think I think there's a matter of like looking at it and recognizing that a person's willingness to like kind of like forego these like social expectations, I think is problematic. But it's not because of it's not because the word itself has all the power.
It's just because you defy the social expectations. So right. I don't necessarily disagree with this line of argument. Well, I do, but I can understand the internal consistency. But if you want to maintain the consistency of this, we have to get rid of it in the music. Because how weird is it that there's like a guy in the gym with his fucking cell phone speaker on, playing music that has the N-word in it, and he's listening to it, but he can't, like, say that to a person next to him. That's, like, I feel like we have to go through very crazy mental gymnastics to try to find a way where, well, it's okay that he's listening to it and playing it for other people to hear, but he's not saying it exactly. And even though it's meant in a certain way there and he means it in a certain way, it's still bad if he says it. It just feels, like, so bizarre.
I don't find that particularly bizarre. But just to be clear here, so we are establishing, first point, one is obviously very distinct from like the Karen word. Obviously, it's very.
They're all
very
different words, of course.
But I mean, it's substantively distinct.
There's
from
more.
These words.
I don't know if I say substantive, but there's far more gravity there. It's like obviously.
Yeah. And I think when people try to equate these words, then I feel like that's part of the reasoning, or that in itself is probably indicative of a lack of understanding of how this word has felt.
Potentially. But I don't think people try to equate the words. I think people just try to say that, like, if we should avoid certain classes of... The N-word is not a special class in and of itself. We can put the N-word there with other types of slurs, other types of racial slurs, and maybe other types of, like, gender or sexual
because
slurs.
we tend to group things. But, like, obviously, in degree and severity, the N-word is significantly outweighing literally
it might
any
be
other word
worse,
you can
but if
put
it's still in the same class,
in a class with it.
Nobody outside of, like, a classroom is going to understand this highly intellectualized reason of why
not true
you can't use the
whatsoever.
N-word, but we can use... like any other racial slur. I don't think you can do that.
No, but most people aren't even arguing that you can use other racial slurs. But
Sure.
we are arguing specifically that these things are worse. And again, I don't think it takes a classroom for somebody to identify the N-word is significantly worse than Karen. The N-word is significantly worse than cracker. The N-word is significantly worse than literally any slur. However, no, that's just it. Like, I don't think it takes a classroom for that. I think
Worse,
most people
for
have
sure,
understood
more
that.
gravity, but not in a class of its own.
Sure. I guess it depends on how specific you want to get with the class.
Mhm.
But again, putting something within a class when there's a spectrum of things is
Mhm.
probably a little bit more intelligent. And again, I don't think that takes a classroom. For example, you can have incredibly high functioning autism, right? Which I think at one point they used to call like Asperger's or something.
Mhm.
And sure, you can say Asperger's is in the same class as other mental disorders. But clearly, if you want to start talking about something like MR, then it starts mental retardation. It starts getting significantly worse, right? Like these things are like a high functioning autistic person and a
Mhm.
mentally retarded person. They're incredibly different. So while you can say, yes, they're in the same class, in order to say that, it feels reductive because you're almost eliminating the fact that this word is something specific, something way more vitriolic, way more harmful, and it has a
If you
unique classification in the sense
Sure.
that it has been, because it was so uniquely hurtful, that the fact that people are reclaiming that word and making it something more positive is something unique
You
in
can say that, but
almost in
like
itself.
it feels like today the harm is just culturally reinforced. That's where the majority of like the shock value comes from, is because we
The harm was
culturally
always
reinforce it.
culturally reinforced. The harm
No,
behind
hold on.
wait, the harm behind any word is going to be culturally
Hold on.
enforced.
The harm behind the N word wasn't just that it was culturally bad. It's that you had an entire power structure of white people owning slaves.
Sounds like you're talking about culture.
Um, when I say culturally reinforced, I'm talking about like today it's bad not because slave owners are calling slaves the N word or because white people are constantly running around like I hate N words, blah blah blah. It's just like a cultural thing. We're like, well, this is bad because it's bad, and we know it should be bad, but not for like the same. There's not the same power structure that existed, 200 years ago that made it really really bad.
Sure. Okay. So I guess like pointing out that maybe the life circumstances of individuals who would be the recipients
It's
of such
gotten
a
less
word.
bad over time, is what I would say. Is that okay?
I disagree.
Okay. So how can we say if it hasn't gotten any less bad, then why the fuck
Or-
do black people use it? Maybe
I'm
then
s-
they just shouldn't do it anymore.
I'm-
Because the defanging and the taking it back clearly doesn't work then,
You're
right?
right. I'm wrong there. It
Okay,
has
that's
obviously gotten. It
Sure.
obviously has.
It's
I'm
still like the
contradicting
worst,
myself.
and
Right.
it's still up there for sure.
Right.
But
And
it's not. It doesn't have quite the sting anymore.
Sure. Sure. That's. I mean, there's no way around that.
Like
That's
whereas
literally
my
the
guess would
purpose
be
of
like
it. Yeah.
100 years ago, if you heard a white person call somebody an N-word in a restaurant, like I'm just gonna totally guess most of the black people would probably be really uncomfortable.
Sure.
But nowadays, if you hear a white person call somebody the N-word in a restaurant, even black people are probably looking around like, the fuck, this guy's crazy. And it's almost like funny because of how stupid, some of you are not like in the South or something, right? About how crazy or insane this white person is saying the N-word. It's going to be like a, it's
Like
going to
you're
be,
talking about hard R.
yeah.
I don't
It's
think
going to be
any
like a,
people would-
I'm not saying it's going to be like not comfortable, but I'm saying that like it's going to be like way more lighthearted in how people are going to
I don't
be
think
around.
it'll be. We looked at like.
Hold on, I'm going to be more absolute here. I am absolutely right here. 100 years ago, hearing the hard R in a restaurant, I think would have made the average black person way more afraid than hearing it today, where people are probably more likely to pull out their cell phones and be like, look at this crazy dude losing his mind.
Well, sure. Well, so first off, I mean, I think like the idea that it's like lighthearted. I don't think that it would be lighthearted. I think maybe I'm just having. I'm kind of taking exception with some of the phrases specifically that you're saying.
Sure.
It's not going to be lighthearted. What it's going to be is most likely, a lot again because the word has like gotten like less vitriolic or it has been defanged to some degree. I think people are a lot of times just gonna. Some people are just gonna say, "I'm rising above this." Right? We're in a different state where a lot of people have a lot of self-love, self-acceptance, and so on and so forth, and an acknowledgement that a person saying that like you just don't have the same respect for them. It was different when you felt like you were already subjugated and you viewed a person somewhat better than you. But I think respect for an insult is only as strong as the respect for the individual who issued it. Right? Like
No, I don't agree with
to
that.
some
But
degree.
go
For
ahead.
example,
I totally
like,
disagree, but go ahead.
well, for say some MR person calls me stupid. It's like, doesn't really sting very much because like you're the one, whatever. Or say somebody that I have like literally zero respect for says something like, yeah, I think you're some whatever insult. Then if I don't respect a person, it's very easy for me to like kind of like dismiss that. It's significantly more easy to dismiss that for a person I have no respect for than it is for me for that to come from a person that I actually respect. Do you disagree with that?
Yeah. I think that for some insults, I think that can be the case. But I think that 100 years ago, there was a more unifying black experience in the United States where you were directly engaged with like a struggle against like the white state. You literally
that
had
struggle is part of that respect.
well, I guess, but that's not unique to the individual. Like any white person could theoretically wield that power over any black person,
Because
whether you
even in
respected the white person or not.
Because even in the worst circumstances, it was like pretty universally accepted that white people were like
Better than black people, right?
That
yeah.
was like that was the structure, the structural powers almost like not almost. directly deemed it so, where you can't live in a white neighborhood.
Yeah, you can't go to a white
own
school,
property.
you can't go to a white
drink
water
from this
fountain.
fountain.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
can't. So then, because of that, there was already like a system enforced respect. So then, at that point, it's really hard to like almost contend with the point that I'm making, that the respect for an insult is depending on the respect for the individual who's issuing it, because in this situation there was a culturally and systematically
Yeah.
enforced respect.
So I'm saying that like
there,
the
so
N
this
word kind
doesn't
of like
apply.
went along. It was riding the same wave as that institution, basically. Whereas today, it feels like a lot different in that that wouldn't be like a socially accepted thing, probably almost anywhere in the country. So if you were to hear it, it's not just like a, oh man, like there's another like white guy sitting on the top of the power hierarchy that's like reinforcing my separation from society. It's more like, who's this crazy motherfucker in the restaurant saying the N word? Like, this dude is insane. Time to start recording and post it on Facebook because this guy's crazy.
I think that pretty often those situations are not going to be just a matter of, oh, this person is crazy. Some people are going to be directly offended, and some people are going to get violent. Remember the Twisted Tea situation that happened with that dude, where the white guy kept calling him the N word, and eventually he busted the Twisted Tea over that dude's head? Or like when Popeyes came out with their chicken sandwich, and people were like fighting, and there was some like tensions, and then all of a sudden somebody called a person the N word. That person responded and got incredibly violent. I think it was someone pointed out. I didn't actually see this video, but there was a panel when we were having this discussion, and someone said, yeah, there was a old white guy that called someone the N word, and then he got punched in his face and was killed by the punch, right? So I think the idea that, like, yes, there are some people. I'm one of those people. Somebody calls me the hard R. Am I going to be truly like offended? I'm going to be offended,
For
but
sure.
I don't think it's probably going to have as much weight, because then it's just like I don't know. I think I'm probably better than that person, like as a
Sure.
human
Yeah, I
being.
understand that.
So, but I can still recognize that this thing is incredibly harmful, and I don't think I would be looking at it lightheartedly. It would probably be a response that I think is the proper response, while not being emotionally invested. And I think that's where where I feel like Black people as a whole, plenty of us have risen emotionally to the point that these things aren't nearly as catastrophic, but they still have a significant like mental weight that we probably give due diligence.
Wouldn't it just be way easier if we just didn't care that much about it? And then we just like, when people were racist, we got mad at them for being racist instead of saying words that they hear in like music that they're inundated with 24/7.
That was a
Wouldn't
problem. That was a problem earlier. When you were saying that, immediately we assume that the person is racist. I don't know that's the case. Sometimes it's not even a matter of assuming that the person is racist. Sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing that this is something that is unacceptable, that we've like deemed is culturally wrong, and you're doing this thing. You're violating. That's a violation. And it doesn't matter. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're racist. It could just mean that you're violating this cultural expectation that we have from you, and that's offensive. I don't. Yeah. Do you think that that's realistically more?
If
common?
people believe that, I would be way more okay with that. I
Do
would
you
think
think
it's
no one
dumb.
believes that?
I think it's way more people that could be like, that guy's racist.
Well, I think a lot of times people are willing.
I've had people call me racist if I post a meme where one of the guys says like the soft A in the meme. People like, Destiny just used the N word. I'm like,
I can't really answer for people on Twitter,
Sure,
but
and I
will say-
understand. It's not fair. I'm not making it
and again, I really want to say that more often than not, people are going to be likely to call someone a racist, not just because they said the N word, but because we have such a very clearly defined cultural expectation that you won't be saying this. And so if we know this is something that won't be done, we know that this is like the easiest indicator of someone being racist, because we've made this so culturally defined, and you're choosing to do that, then I think, yeah, you could probably rest in the assumption that a person that was willing to use this word in a harmful way is probably racist. I think it's more likely than not. However, I think the offense isn't just because a person is racist. We're aware that people are racist all the time. But normally the reaction is to the violation.
sure, if somebody acts like that, I'm more agreeable to that, even though I would still push against it than the person thinking the other person's racist. But sure.
Oh, sure.
I understand what you're saying.
I would totally agree with you that you can't immediately assume that a person is racist just because they said the N word.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily follow that a person is racist. But
Okay.
I don't think that's the offense. Do you agree with me? For sure. Just want to make sure this is crystal clear, that the N word is absolutely not equivalent, even if it's in the same class, that there's a significantly higher degree between the N word and the word cracker.
Yeah, but almost for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And same with like pretty much the vast majority
But I
of
think that
racial
like
slurs.
if somebody doesn't want to be called something, I think that they're all racist. But like obviously one is worse than the other for sure.
I agree. I think a person like willingly just like labeling white people in general as something like cracker is obviously going to be it's just as harmful. And I think if you're starting to like use these labels which have these racial intents, it is indicative of some sort of like personal belief.
Sure.
And so okay, so then these two things are incredibly distinct. And so this, I guess we probably got to get into We'll take a small break if we can. But I think the piece specifically about black artists and black music, I think that part.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. You know, I'm a musician, and I followed a lot of black music all my life and black artists, and specifically. And I collected just a few examples of different black artists and their kind of takes on, their takes on various issues, and I just think that's something that we need to discuss.
Sure.
Alrighty, take a small break. Yeah.
Okay.
How have you felt so far?
That's fine.
Good conversation, right?
Feel great.